Hello, welcome to PsychEd. Oh, I am Luke, aka the Bearded Heretic. Ah, what a day! Had so many tech issues today, obviously, because it says answers and reason, and what would we be without tech issues? We'd be nothing. That's what I say, would be nothing. So, welcome all. How are you all doing today? Please do interact in the chat. It's great seeing you guys chatting and stuff, so please do that. And yeah, I've got a iced coffee today because it's warm in this room. This room has a boiler in. My Mac overheats a lot, and so it's just so warm. And it's 25 degrees already. So normally in the winter I'd use this as like free heating, but in the summer it's just a killer. So anyway, let's get started, shall we? Today we're going to be talking about my bread and butter, basically. And that is learning disabilities. And the reason it's my bread and butter is because I work in community learning disability service provider, which basically means that I support people who have learning disabilities in the community. And in the community just means in public, in like living a normal life in public. But some people need a bit of extra support, and that's what I aim to do. So I provide people with coping strategies for their emotions, help them deal with relationships and stuff like that. So that's my role, and that's why I'm so kind of passionate and also fairly, I'd like to think anyway, knowledgeable on the subject. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. So it's good to see you. Hi, Jovial Dane. Nice to have you here. And yeah, so let's get started, shall we? Without further ado, let's not waste any time. So I guess the first thing we need to do is establish what learning disability is. And I think this is a big area of confusion, and I'm going to break it down really simply for you because it's really actually quite simple. A learning disability is a specific diagnosis. It's not a vague kind of overarching thing, because a lot of people confuse learning disability with learning difficulties. Learning difficulties being, developmental or developmental conditions such as ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, those kind of things. Those are learning difficulties, and the reason they're learning difficulties is because they can impact on your learning. So if you're dyslexic and you struggle with reading, then rote learning, reading from a book, is going to be very difficult. The same things with ADHD. You're not going to be able to attend to teaching as easily if you have ADHD. So that will impact your learning. So these are learning difficulties. They make learning more difficult. Whereas a learning disability is something very specific. And it is essentially three things. The first being an IQ. Now, the IQ test that they tend to use is the WAIS 4 or 5? Something like that. The WAIS. WAIS. And the IQ test essentially gives an estimation on intelligence. IQ is intelligence quotient, and that's what it's supposed to measure. So it does that by measuring three different areas, and we're going to come to the issues with IQ testing in a bit. But it measures three different areas: verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, so that's like spatial awareness and stuff like that, and then the final thing is arithmetic, so maths. So it measures those three things, and if you score differently on any of those things, then you get your IQ score. IQ is always averaged at 100. So the average population or someone. Hello, Sandy. Nice to have you here. So the average person should have an IQ score of 100. Now, there's some issues with that as well, and we'll come to that as well. So that's the first thing, intelligence. Now, in order to receive a diagnosis of learning disability, you have to have an IQ score of less than 70 or less. Anywhere between 70 and 80 is called borderline learning disability. And then you have mild learning disability from 70 to 50. 50 to 20 no, sorry, 40, 40 to 50 is moderate. 20 to 40 is severe, and then anything below 20 is profound. So those are the different categories essentially. And I might have got the numbers slightly wrong, but they're roughly correct. um, and so yeah, IQ under 70. Now, a standard deviation for an IQ test is 10. And a standard deviation is just how um, it's a statistical test to see how much people deviate from the norm. So IQ tests are designed to have a mean of 100 and then a standard deviation of 10. So that means that uh, one standard deviation from the norm is 110 or 90. Okay, so 70 is three standard deviations from 10. And if you look at a, a bell graph, um, a bell distribution, which is what the IQ test is based on, the further you go along, the less people there are in that thing, and the less of the population have that um, uh, specific IQ. So the further away you get, the less likely it is that someone will have an IQ of like you know 90 compared to 70. So learning disabilities are fairly rare. I don't know the exact maths, but it's let me just see actually what three standard deviations is. Because this will give you a rough estimate of prevalence. So 99.7%. So that would be 0.03% would be below that line. So yeah, 0.03, 0.03%, sorry, 0.3% will be below that line. So it's not, the prevalence rate isn't very high, but it's kind of like an arbitrary um, number because you're kind of dictating at what point if someone has an IQ of 75, you know, they're not part of that 0.03, but they may still have some of the kind of like limitations or impairments that someone with an IQ of 70 may have. So it gets a bit kind of arbitrary at a certain point, and that's another thing that we will discuss a bit later. So that's the first thing is IQ. Second thing is impairment in social functioning. Now this one is a bit of a red herring, only that social functioning in this context doesn't refer to just the ability to make relationships or interact in social environments. It's essentially the ability to live independently. So, make sure you understand how to rent or pay bills or, um, you know, interact socially as part of that. Make sure you know how to cook effectively or clean yourself or any of these things. So that's one of the things that's important in this diagnosis is an impairment in social functioning. And then the final thing is that it has to be diagnosed before the age of 18. Now, the rationale for this is that everyone who exists in the UK, let's use the UK as an example, because I think it's a smaller country, so it has a bit more oversight in this area. Everyone that is born in the UK will go into a schooling system where they're specifically trained how to look out for developmental stages, and they'll also have GPs and stuff that they'll be going to see and things like that. And if a child is kind of not meeting those developmental milestones, then they can essentially diagnose it. And if someone doesn't get picked up on by the system before the age of 18, that's really unusual. So it's implied that if someone develops these characteristics after the age of 18, then they've probably acquired a brain injury, and that would be a different thing than a learning disability. Different diagnosis. That would be an acquired brain injury. So Jovial Dane has a comment. Let me just put it up on the screen. Would people or some people with, e.g., Down syndrome fall under LD? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's likely that the majority of people who have Down syndrome fall in the learning disability category. So this is the other thing. So learning disability is a diagnosis on its own, independent of other diagnoses. So, for instance, autism, like if you have someone who has severe autism, they may also have learning disability with that. And it could be because of their autism, but it's a separate diagnosis, regardless of any other conditions they have. So Down syndrome is one of those things. And actually, I think Down syndrome is more likely to be, because a syndrome is a collection of symptoms. And I think maybe the learning disability part is part of that collection of symptoms. I don't know exactly though, so don't quote me on that. I haven't done much research into Down syndrome specifically. Hello, Claire. Nice to have you here. Glad you can join us. Um, so those are the three things: IQ equal to or less than 70, uh, impairment in social functioning, diagnosed before the age of 18. And again, age of 18 is a bit arbitrary, but that's like adulthood in the UK. So before they're an adult, it has to be diagnosed whilst they're legally a child. Okay. So that's the diagnosis out of the way. That's what learning disability is. Okay. Now, what I want to start with is actually let's start with some of the causes. So causes of learning disabilities are complex because it's not always clear what the cause of learning disability is. But there's essentially three things we can look at, and they kind of go in an order. So the first thing is hereditary. So is there any genetics that plays a role, or genetics that plays a role? Certain genes or certain things that are inherited from the parents, which then develop a learning disability, and you can see that in some developmental disorders, they're genetic disorders, and Down syndrome doesn't count in this area. Um, and I'll explain why soon, because it's not technically a genetic disorder, because it's not inherited from the genes. So that's the first thing. Is it inherited? Second thing is congenital, which just means before birth. Okay, so is there any trauma or anything like that that happens before birth that could cause a learning disability? Maybe there's a physically traumatic event. Maybe the mother is drinking, and the child develops something like alcohol fetal syndrome or fetal alcohol syndrome. I never remember which way around it is. Which is correlated quite highly with learning disabilities. Um, is there any other kind of things? Uh, does a mum get sick? So anything that happens before birth, and then the final thing is it social or environmental? So severe neglect. So this could be trauma, neglect, abuse, any of those things in the early developmental phases. This could also be part of this could also be Down syndrome, because Down syndrome would be in congenital, but Down syndrome is an extra chromosome. And social environmental can also include like things like lack of education and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, those are the causes. Now the problem is that usually what we find is that the cause is unknown. Not everyone has a clear syndrome like Down syndrome. Well, I'd say most people with learning disabilities don't, and also sometimes it's multiple things, these factors that actually kind of cross over and interact with each other that cause learning disability. So you get a mixture of things, and that's really kind of the causes. So most people with learning disability, you won't know the cause of it. Just got a few more comments. Let's have a look. Lone Wolf says, I am a genetic disorder. I guess technically everyone is. Luke Minnell says, always been interested in this. I grew up with someone who was sent to a special school for LD. I'm going to talk about special schools in a little bit, so keep that in mind. Dave syndrome. Okay. Lone Wolf is trying to disrail the stream again. and I'll allow it because he does a very good job. Okay, so that's what a learning disability is and what the causes are. I've got that out of the way because that's really kind of like the bare bones stuff, right? That stuff doesn't really tell us much about anything other than the fact that people with learning disabilities have low IQs or relatively low IQs, um, and uh, they have an impairment in their social functioning, and it's caused by multiple different things, including nature and nurture and how they interact with each other. So those, it's not really kind of meaningful. What I want to get into is really the social approach to people with learning disabilities. What's happened in history, what's happening now, and what needs to happen, essentially, because it's quite gross. Actually, it's quite sad as well. Um, so let's start with IQ. What is IQ? How did it get developed? Well, IQ was really originally started after Charles Darwin released his seminal work, The Origin of Species, which detailed um, how characteristics, the theory of evolution, how characteristics are inherited by the offspring of uh, the two parents, and those characteristics survive. If that organism survives, and those characteristics live on and get passed down to that uh, child's offspring as well. And what we saw as a result of that, because this is the very early days in evolutionary theory, was kind of a misattribution of this into a um, an academic an academic field known as eugenics. Now, this eugenics field was really started by Francis Galton, who was the cousin of Charles Darwin, and used his kind of early works as a kind of a foundation for his idea about eugenics. Now, originally, eugenics started out as uh, essentially taking all of the powerful and the rich and the successful, etc., and breeding them to create more, uh, to basically keep the more positive traits on in future generations. Um, Ironically, this is one of the reasons inbreeding in like rich families and stuff started. And if anyone knows about incest and the results of incestuous relationships, it doesn't end well because of the lack of diversity in the genetic pool. Um, so it was misjudged that way anyway. But um, eventually, it took a more insidious route, and they actually started to uh, limit and oppress certain kind of minority groups because they didn't like the characteristics that they had. Um, and one of these groups was people with learning disabilities. Another group was gay people. Another group was black people. Another group was Romani gypsies. Another group was Jews. So you can see that actually all of these groups were seen as subhuman. They were seen as having less than human traits. They were seen as no better than animals, and um, they were treated as such. And I think it's needless to say that this kind of work started in the late 1800s, but the the academic pursuit of eugenics and what it was continued on until the 1930s, when Hitler's rise to power happened, and there was a book that detailed Nordic superiority theory, and Hitler was very inspired by that kind of concept, which is where the Aryan race idea came from, and the whole eugenics thing in Nazi Germany picked up. So you can see actually how damaging this was as an idea, just in the short period of time that it was around for. It led to some of the worst atrocities in human history. So, but the people that don't get talked about that often are the people who had learning disabilities, who were there was a bunch of different things that happened. Um, Now, Lone Wolf says, "Isn't that why the royals have sickle cell anemia?" Probably. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to make any assumptions, but um, and I've lost my train of thought. And Joe's messaging me in the group chat, and it's distracting me. Where was I? Someone remind me. I was talking about Nazis, I think. Oh, people with learning disabilities, right? So they did a number of things, and some of them were really horrible. One of the main things they did in the UK was segregation and isolation. Okay, so what they did was they essentially put all of the people who were deemed to be too stupid to live in society, and that's the wording that they used at the time. They called them idiots. They called them morons. These were academic labels for them. These were diagnoses. There's other words that I don't want to repeat that they used as well in diagnosis, and they put them all into hospitals as if they had mental illness. Um, they also, in parts of the world, chemically castrated them so that they couldn't reproduce. Because if they reproduced, then the idea was the overall population of the world would be worse off, because uh, their genes aren't good enough, essentially. And they also exterminated them too in certain parts of the world. So as you can see, not a good track record for the way we've treated people with learning disabilities. Now, you would think that segregation has had ended from 19, I don't know, the 1920s, maybe earlier, to 1922. That's 100 years. Sorry, 2022. The year we are in, 2022. However, you can still get, and this includes autism actually, so I'm going to include autism here. You can still get sectioned under the Mental Health Act purely for having a diagnosis of a learning disability or autism. That makes no sense to me. It's not a mental health disorder. It is, but this is the thing, right? If someone is, uh, well, and let's not forget, someone went to a special school, right? Special educational needs school, they're called these days, right? That is segregating them from the regular schooling system, putting them into a situation where they are separate. They are kept away from the rest of society. Now, the special educational needs schools, I think they're largely okay, but they have a lot of issues. They don't do um, like the same sort of sex education, uh, and these individuals are not interacting with people who don't have learning disabilities. So one that has two effects. One, the individual doesn't learn social skills in the same way we do, and two, everyone else doesn't interact with people with learning disabilities on a regular basis during their school years, which is probably where they ought to be interacting with them to see them as more human, not dehumanize them. So for me, that's just absolute. It's just ridiculous to me that that's still the case. And yeah, Luke Minor says it uh, in a really good way. Sorry, I keep losing my mouse on my desk. Special school will just lead to stigma, especially in small communities. Yes. Why is that person going somewhere different? They're going to the dumb school, the stupid school. There's the school bus might get called a name like the window licker bus, that kind of stuff. It's horrible. It's horrible. Segregating and isolating people is horrible, and we're still doing it. We're still doing it in the UK, and that's gross to me. And you know, um, what ends up happening is that a lot of people spend, most of the time just being supported as adults, having been in hospital for a while, maybe, having committed no offences or anything like that. They're just kept in hospitals because they might be not able to communicate their needs very well, and which we'll get to the like how people behave and stuff, and then they're expected to just act in society as like they know how to act. Like, no, that's not how it works. That's not how any of us work. None of us come in knowing the rules of society. We learn them through interaction with society. And so this is still a problem, still a big problem. And you know what? Like, I think if it was any other group, okay, right. So one of the things that people with learning disabilities struggle with is communication, and that's because um, it that people with learning disabilities are people like the rest of us, yeah, but they have things that they find more difficult to learn. Now that doesn't mean that it's impossible for them to learn. They just need to be taught differently, taught for longer, or shown uh, in a specific way, one-to-one way. Now, the national schooling system isn't cut out for that, and that's part of the problem, I think. But if we had better school infrastructure, we'd be able to do that. We'd be able to help people one-to-one, more one-to-one, to learn these skills, right? And what that means is like things that even aren't even taught in school, like recognizing your emotions, being able to communicate your emotions, being able to ask for things in a constructive way, etc. All of that stuff isn't taught, right? It's not taught to us really, but because of our neurotypicality, we're able to pick up on that stuff through the observation and stuff. It needs to be a bit more direct with people with learning disabilities and repeated and made into an accessible format for them. Um, Now, if they're not able to communicate those things, then they're going to try and communicate them in another way. So if I was really frustrated, or if I actually, let's use a different example. If I had a raging headache and someone was talking really loudly and I couldn't communicate, you're talking really loudly and it's making my headache worse. What I might do is I might go over and punch that person in order to try and make them shut up, right? Now, I think if all of us had like our mouth sewn shut and we had these things, we would act in the same way. And by and large, I think we would act in the same way. Um, because it's the only way we can get our words across. We might pinch people or punch people or something like this in order to, not hard, but just in order to get a message across. I want you to be quiet. I've got a headache. Um, but when that's done with people with learning disabilities, they get sent to hospitals. They're treated for they're treated with like medication and stuff. They're not given those skills in hospital, and then they're expected to come out and just continue to communicate well, be a model citizen without any extra learning or extra input into them. Now, I find this really frustrating because I've seen firsthand how if you take a direct approach and you focus on one topic at a time and you make it accessible for that individual, which is different compared to different people. People learn disabilities learn so much and their behavior changes and they become better at this communication. They might not need to punch anymore. They might not need to shout or scream or swear. They might be able to just say, I have a headache, can you be quiet, please? And that's good. But we need to give them the space. And the other thing that happens is that there's a lot of oversight in special educational needs schools. So on the playground, like in a neurotypical school, that like especially in like mainly in secondary schools, you get like teenagers who are going through puberty, like flirting with each other and doing like kind of what their attempts at flirting and maybe getting things slightly wrong, but it's kind of part of that learning process, and they get actual sex education and stuff like this in a special educational needs school. If that flirting kind of behavior happened, there's a safeguarding raised. That person is given a label of having challenging behaviors that sticks with them for essentially the rest of their lives, and they're treated like they're hard to work with because of it. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone keeps telling me I'm hard to work with, even no matter how much I try not to be, I'm just going to end up being hard to work with because there's no point in trying to prove you wrong. Yeah, so So this is the situation we're in, where we're setting people up to fail. We're giving them self fulfilling prophecies. We're segregating them. We're isolating them, and we're expecting we're expecting them without any effort on our part, as like a society, um, to for them to act in accordance with the social rules that are arbitrarily chosen for the culture they're in. That's wrong. Not to mention, this is all built on a couple hundred years of eugenics rhetoric, both in the UK, in Nazi Germany, and in America, in all the places, of saying that in order to be a valuable member of society, and this is capitalist rhetoric as well, you need to be productive. And this is the next thing I really want to challenge, is that productivity does not equate to value. Productivity is a false value given to us through capitalism and through the eugenics movement, which had to assign value arbitrarily in order to say, well, what is it that these rich people do? Or what, not rich people, what is it that these successful members of society do? How is it that they're so good and these people are so bad? Well, productivity, maybe. Intelligence, looks, I don't know. They kind of picked them arbitrarily. And because we're in this system, this capitalist system, and I'm not right. Before I continue, uh, I obviously live in this system and I engage with it, and I think it's fine. I'm not the most fervent capitalist in the world. I don't think communism would work. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. Um, but one thing is for certain is that I don't place my personal value on how much money I'm making. I don't think that that's the only thing that gives me value. I don't place it on how productive I am to society. I place my personal value on how nice I am to other people, my emotional connection to other people, being kind as much as I possibly can. Sometimes it's difficult when certain people are being annoying on Twitter, uh, um, but those are the things that I value, and I think that um, people who are less likely to be able to be as productive shouldn't be shunned or shouldn't be discriminated against or shouldn't be made to feel worthless because they can't or they're less able to uh, be productive. They have other valuable traits to them. They're usually lovely people. They really want to just, you know, have the same relationships as us. In fact, if we went through the three most important things in our lives, guarantee you most of us will say our family, our friends, our pets. If we're religious, we might say God. They're all based around relationships. And that's not different for the people we support. Their value doesn't come from their productivity, it comes from their relationships. So, if we segregate people, we're taking away all the value in their life because they're then taken away from their families, they're taken away from their friends, they're forced to live in this bubble away from the rest of society where they're not engaging with anything or anyone other than other people with learning disabilities who are also being forced to be there. It doesn't make any sense. And this is why all forms of eugenics are wrong because it's predicated on the premise that value it comes from productivity. And I think that's wrong. And Richard Dawkins has a lot to answer for in that sense because people with Down syndrome, people with learning disabilities, can have amazing lives. They just need to be supported with that in a little bit of a different way. And when Richard Dawkins says something like, "You have a moral obligation to have an abortion if you find out your child has Down syndrome, you're pregnant, the child you're going to give birth to has Down syndrome, because that child's um, quality of life is going to be low." That's predicated on the idea that the reason that child's life is going to be life quality of life is going to be low is because it has no productive value, which isn't which isn't the case. I work with people who have learning disabilities who are parents and they're great parents. I work with people who have learning disabilities who have work, and they're really liked at their jobs. They're very hard workers. Now they're not doing like they're not like professional footballers. They're not doing like what's it called, like accounting or like law or anything like that. They're working in shops, or they're working in cafes, or they're working, you know, collecting scrap metal or whatever. They're doing those things, and they're good at it. They get the job done. They do what is needed of them. They're not making the economy hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, but that doesn't matter. Neither are the royal family. They just take. So that I don't know if that's the end of my rant yet, but that's certainly the end of part of it. Um, I think it's disgusting how we've treated people with learning disabilities over the past couple of 100 years, um, and I don't think we're moving in kind of the right direction in destigmatizing mental illness. I think it's kind of become a bit of a weird fad recently, where people want to have every mental health diagnosis under the sun, and they the kind of the focus is on depression and anxiety, and mild depression and mild anxiety. And whilst I think that those two things can be horrible for people that are having experienced both myself in the past, they're horrible for the people experiencing them. But um, the focus is away from severe psychosis, severe bipolar, other kind of a bit more abnormal uh, mental disorders such as dissociative identity disorder, body integrity identity disorder, which is people people claim people are trans ableist, which uh, when actually they have body identity integrity disorder, body. I don't remember which way around it is. And other things, personality disorders. They're all there, but there's only depression and anxiety really being talked about. And I think that we're going to get there, hopefully, but we're on the right track. People are talking about mental illness a bit more in a more productive way, but people aren't talking about learning disabilities. In fact, I see loads of people just like completely. They use IQ, which is IQ is a eugenicist tool that's been developed for eugenics to see if someone needs to be segregated from society, or to see whether uh, IQ was used to justify slavery. IQ was used to justify um, like kind of the reinforcement of like the what's it called? I can't remember the laws, but there was the laws in America that basically enforced segregation and stuff between black and white people. That was IQ was used to justify that. IQ was used to justify elements of the the Holocaust, and that's what it was designed for. There's a great video on Sean talking about the bell curve, which is a book written about intelligence and the bell curve and stuff. And he rips it to shreds because this is 1990s, and they're basically justifying the use of IQ, and especially with regards to white people and black people. There's a lot of racist stuff in there. But honestly, it's just awful. So yeah, IQ's one of those funny things as well, because if you think about how it works, education is getting better in the UK. That's without a doubt. Like even though education standards have dropped in the past few years, the quality of education in the UK has gone up, and most of Europe. Uh, I don't know about America, but certainly most of Europe. Which means that they have to keep developing new IQ tests, because what's happening is that if you get more people who are more um, intelligent, you get a skew. It starts skewing up. So 100 is no longer the average, and 10 is no longer the standard deviation. So then they have to develop a new test in order to match the new layout of the IQ kind of landscape, essentially. Which means that if you have, like, there was someone who I work with who was in hospital for 50 years. He was segregated from society for 50 years in hospital. We now support him in the community. Um, and his IQ back then, he would come out with a mild learning disability, and that was based on an IQ taken in, I don't know, 1960s. So things have obviously moved on from there. Education's increased, improved, um, etc. And then the IQ tests have changed and they've gone up. So his IQ might actually be lower than what it was 50 years ago. And we might be overestimating his capabilities based on this IQ test. Because it's not static. It's not a static thing. An IQ of 100 now does not mean the same thing as an IQ of 130 years ago, 40 years ago. It's not the same. Likewise, an IQ of 130 now isn't the same as an IQ of 130, 40, 50 years ago. So it's not this static thing that just stays the same, because the test changes, but also it's not a static thing that stays the same, because, our moods change. If I go take a test and everything goes wrong in the morning, I wake up, uh, it's raining really heavily, I miss my bus, I don't have any food in, so I can't eat before I go. I'm late for my appointment. They make me wait longer because I'm late for my appointment. I'm going to do worse on that test than if everything goes well. That's just how we work. So then they might come up with an IQ test that's wrong to some extent. It's got some error in it because of all those factors. Maybe I didn't sleep. That's all the case. And they don't do repeat testing. It's just the one test, and then they analyze it. So there's loads of things wrong with IQ, and my personal issue with it is just how it started, what it was used for to begin with. And they kind of say it's like these three factors are good correlates with other intelligence factors, such as, like, you know building or something. I don't know, but languages, that kind of thing. But they're correlated highly, but they're not 100% correlation. So you could have someone that has a low IQ, but they're really, really good in a different area, you know. And we're saying, well, they're incapable because this IQ test, which only looks at three different variables, uh, is low. So they must be bad at everything. It's another issue with IQ tests. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of beef there. I have a lot of beef with the way people learn. So how can we make it better? Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things we can do. I think being more aware of issues that affect people with learning disabilities is one of them. Just having them in your consciousness, as if, like, just like people with mental illness is at the moment in people's consciousness. Um, Stop valuing people based on their productivity is a really big one. Like, I don't know why that's a thing anyway, but let's stop doing it. Uh, that would be really good. Um, and I think it's about seeing people for people, because one of the biggest things that I have issues with is seeing people with learning disabilities as eternal children. They have the mind of a 9-year-old. One of my least favorite sayings, because they're not a child. They're an adult with learning disabilities. They may need things broken down for them in a similar way to how you would with somebody who's at that level, who's neurotypical, and maybe that is a 9-year-old. But in terms of how you talk to them and stuff, they're maturing at the same rate as us. in terms of like their physicality and stuff. So they go through things like puberty at the same age as everyone else. They go through all these different uh, developmental stages the same as us. Now their ability to understand and comprehend things may be delayed or impaired, but that just means we need to change the way that we're teaching. It doesn't mean we need to think of them as a child. Yeah, it's so we need to get rid of that thought. We need to stop uh, with intelligence being a value judgment in conversations, and using insulting terms that are based on that to make ourselves feel more superior, as like calling someone an idiot or a moron, or another word which I'm not going to say because I hate it with a passion. Um, that's really bad, because people have different understandings of things, and intelligence shouldn't be the thing that we're rating that against. Just because someone doesn't understand the way you're coming from does not mean that they're less intelligent. And even if they were, that shouldn't be the thing you're judging on. you know, um, I prefer things like, when someone says something and it's not quite right, I prefer saying that's ridiculous or that's silly, because it takes away the value judgment. you know. And then someone went to me, "Oh, so you're saying it's worthy of ridicule because you're saying it's ridiculous?" And I'm like, "What? It just means it's silly. It's a silly thing to say. Why is that? What? And that's still better. Rather say that's ridiculous than that's really like you must be a moron or something." Anyway, um, so what is it like to be someone with a learning disability? Well, it's largely like it is to be somebody who's neurotypical with some things that you just need to account for. Essentially, people with learning disabilities may have issues with their executive functioning, which is essentially just their emotional regulation, or just regulating any behavior. They may be more impulsive. They may struggle to regulate their behavior effectively. Um, they may not understand social rules. There's these two things called abstraction and generalization. Abstraction being the ability to understand abstract concepts such as time. What is time? How do we know when it's flowing? Why does it feel quick sometimes and slow sometimes? Um, how do I know when 5 minutes is up? Naturally, those kind of things are difficult. Love, other emotions, the more kind of abstract elements of those emotions, people may struggle with. They have quite rigid thinking and quite black and white thinking and concrete thinking, so they'll like things tangible. Uh, and you see this in a lot of people anyway. Um, Tangibility is really important to us a lot of the time, and abstract concepts are difficult, and they're just more difficult for people with learning disabilities. Generalization is being able to understand that, um, if I develop certain rules in my household, um, that they also might apply somewhere else, or they don't apply somewhere else. So I always use the example of restaurants. Like, you go into a restaurant and you wait to be seated, and then you order, and then you uh, wait for your food, and then you pay at the end, right? That's the set rules. But if you go somewhere like Nando's, you go in, you go up to the front, and you pay and you order there. Then you wait for your food, and you can leave. And that would be difficult for someone with learning disabilities. More difficult for someone with learning disabilities to understand why it's one set of rules one place and another set of rules somewhere else. So you just got to prepare people a little bit and say these are the rules going into this place. Um, Their ability to attend to things might be impaired, so they might have smaller attention spans, and that's potentially to do with uh, kind of tolerance of things. They may be overstimulated by things in their environment. Um, they may not understand kind of boundaries as easily, which is why we have to like show them boundaries and explain them explicitly. This is a boundary for me. Everything just has to be more explicit and more defined. I think just clearer, more edges. Yeah, don't teach them about the Weatherspoons app, Luke. No, no, don't. Yeah. Weatherspoons just gets lazier and lazier. um, I love it when people go into a spoons and then they give their table number and say what spoons they're at and expect people to buy them drinks. And people do it. People will buy them drinks. It's shocking. Oh, I kind of want to try it one day, but I don't think anyone will get anything for me, and I'll just be sat in a Weatherspoons on my own without any drinks, which is not fun. That would just look really sad. People would be like, "Why is he not drinking?" And I'd be like, well, "I'm waiting for people to order me drinks." Or people that don't like me very much will just order me horrible drinks. Because believe it or not, guys, there are people that don't like me very much on Twitter. I'm controversial. Um, they may try and communicate their needs through ways that are not socially acceptable, such as like I gave the example of punching earlier. They may shout, they may swear, but they're just trying to communicate their needs. Now, there's this thing called positive behavior support, which is essentially um, a method by which we can try and address some of those behaviors, which are now called behaviors of distress, because it's when someone's in distress that um, they'll use those behaviors in order to try and communicate that distress. So, positive behavior support basically tries to plan ahead and introduce more positive behaviors that meet the same need. So, if it's I'm in pain, there might be like a visual aid added, which the person can point to and say, "This is me in pain." Um, so, Claire, say it ain't so. Is this about me being not liked by people? I'm shocked. Claire, what are you trying to say? Are you one of those people? Um, and then so essentially that's it. But the thing is, what we need to do is we need to put ourselves in those individual shoes. If I only had the ability to communicate in the way that they do, would I act any differently? And the answer is normally no. I wouldn't act any differently. And if that's the case, we cannot judge them. We cannot judge them for it. We have to help them. We can't, as I say again and again, we can't expect people just to know how to interact in society. We need to give them the right foundations to be able to work off of that. Good to hear it, Claire. Claire says no. She's not one of those people. Now, does anyone have any questions, by the way? I've talked just like for ages, and I think it would be good just to hear if anyone has any questions about learning disabilities or anything. I think I've covered a lot already. How long have we been going? I don't even know. I can't tell. Oh, just under an hour. So I've covered a lot already. But it'd be good to see if there's any questions. Um, so there's something else that I thought was quite gross that happened not that long ago. So there was this campaigner, a woman who has Down syndrome, who was campaigning essentially to remove the full term abortion law, which is currently in the UK, which is shocking to me. Essentially, if a child uh, has Down syndrome, then the mother can choose to have an abortion right up until uh, the point of birth. And in the UK, for the average abortion, it's up until 28 weeks, 26 weeks, which is essentially what has been described as a viable So essentially 20, I think it's 26 or 28 weeks. That's a viable pregnancy. So the reason that's the law is because if the baby was to be uh, born at that point, it could survive on its own. However, with people with Down syndrome, if they did a test and they found out that the child had Down syndrome, they can do it all the way up until the point where the baby's about to be born, which is horrible to me, because my view of abortion is that it's up until the point of viability, um, and at the very least, it should be even between people with Down syndrome and people without Down syndrome. Um, Yet that went to Supreme Court in the UK and it was overruled. So this person with Down syndrome lost, which just shows another, systemic oppression of people with learning disabilities. Um, what do you think can be the biggest change to the education system that can assist those with learning disabilities in regards to support? I think we need to integrate them into our regular education system, and just I think that would need a little bit of adjustment in terms of how we run things. But you wouldn't need independent special educational needs schools. You'd need more special educational teaching assistants within the schools to help those individuals through it. Because if you think about the stats I told you earlier, so if we're going with the bell curve and how that is analysed, and we're thinking about standard deviations, so we have 100 as the mean, and then we have 10 is each one standard deviation. So every 10, the percentage of people with that level of learning disability goes down like quite a considerable amount. Like it gets down to like 0.00 something, towards the end of the spectrum. So when we're talking about people with learning disabilities, we're mostly talking about people with mild to moderate learning disabilities. And the more profound ones are less common. Now, I think with the more profound ones, there's a case to be made for um, providing them with different support. However, when we're talking about people with mild to moderate learning disabilities, they absolutely should be in the regular schooling system, given a little bit of extra support through having a teaching assistant that's dedicated to them, and uh, being shown to being introduced to all the social skills that would normally occur within a schooling system. The kind of the friendship groups, the 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 rupturing of relationships where you fall out with your mates, and then the repair that happens after that. That's really important. You're not going to get that in a really kind of like institutionalized setup where it's different to that. You know, People need to be integrated into society, otherwise they don't learn how society works. It's foolish to say that people should just come in and be like, yeah, I'm a productive member of society, I'm good, without having any understanding or being given any understanding or learning of how that works. So that's the biggest thing, I think. And I think there should also be just more like levels within certain subjects, because at the moment I think the only one that had levels for me was maths, and that only had like 4 levels. But if you had more levels and you just even that's got issues with it, because then you're segregating the class. I think just throw everyone in together, and people will learn, and then the people that are good at it can show the people that are bad at it how to do it in a better way through peer supervision, essentially, rather than segregating everyone and expecting people to learn that way. Ooh. Integration with additional support like on-site therapies and assistance. Well, they don't need therapists if they. It's more about having someone who understands how that person learns, because so something I heard recently, which was really interesting, was the idea of um, calling it learning difference instead of learning disability. And I kind of get it. I kind of think that disability helps people understand, and helps with things like getting benefits and stuff for people who can't work or struggle with work, right? Disability helps with that. But learning difference is probably more accurate, because it's just about figuring out their individual's learning style and catering to it. So if that person learns better through short sentences with small words in it, or they have a delay in their processing, so you'll say something and then they'll process it, and then it will take maybe a couple of hours, even a couple of days for them to register it. If you have someone who dedicated who knows that information, they'll be able to feed that information to that individual better, and it will just work. It'll just work better, and then you'll get increased kind of awareness amongst the family, and they'll be able to do other interventions within the home, which would work as well. Because at the moment, it's very much focused on professionals, and that's it. I.e., wearing headphones for noise-affected individuals, allowing breaks to decompress, adjusted learning and testing modules currently in the US school English grads. Yeah, I think that stuff can help, definitely. But the other thing is, there needs to be a level of learning coping strategies to deal with that stuff, not just avoiding it. And I think this is another thing that kind of learning disabilities and autism services kind of are prone to do, which is really frustrating, is that they enable people to function. I'm trying to put this in a sensible way. One second. Society as a whole is not built to accommodate people with learning disabilities. Largely, it's not built to accommodate people with disabilities, period, but especially people with learning disabilities. At least people in wheelchairs are getting ramps now, right? Not everywhere has wheelchair access, but a large portion of them do, and that's improving. People with learning disabilities, it's not the same thing. There's very complex systems in place. It's like if we think about train networks and stuff like that. However, if you give someone, it's a bit like if I teach a man to fish. No, if I give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If I teach a man to fish, he'll be able to feed himself for forever, right? That's the kind of idea that I'm going down. If someone is uh, unable to cope with sounds and stuff, rather than just giving them the thing that manages that, giving them headphones to cover their ears, give them coping strategies. Let them know their limit. If someone gets overwhelmed in a supermarket, don't put headphones on them and take them to the supermarket. Get them to start using click and collect. Yeah? So they can order their food online and go and collect it from the supermarket. They're still getting their exercise because they're going for a walk, but they're not having to engage in that environment. They're learning to cope with it and find ways around the world to cope with it. Um, and I think that would be better. I think providing them with coping strategies to deal with the difficulties that they'll face in society is better than just giving them uh, tools to avoid those things, if that makes sense. Um, and I guess allowing breaks to decompress and stuff like that. But again, this is like something we need to be thinking about people with learning disabilities in jobs. The current working environment is very much work, 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 and that's it, right? Like loads of people don't take their breaks anyway. So we need more laws to be more accessible to people with learning disabilities, which is what Nerdy Rodent says. More jobs for people with disabilities across the board, not just learning disabilities, across the board, any type of disability. Absolutely. And there's things I don't understand this. Like, there's so many things that people with disabilities can do that just there's such an untapped workforce there. And it's not that they're not motivated, it's just that the standard is so high. Like, to work in a bloody supermarket, you have to have an impeccable CV. It doesn't make any sense. Why? Why do I have to have like a university education to go work in a supermarket? That does not make sense. It's just so silly to me. They do appear to be managing the issue, but as you stating, not helping him grow through it. Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's the difference there. Okay. So he can have that management, but he also needs to learn. he needs to be told that it's not always going to be he's not always going to be in a scenario where that will be easily managed. You know, and if he can learn coping strategies, like if he's in a supermarket, for instance, and he says, "I'm getting overstimulated. I need to go outside." That's fine, you know. But then go back inside and finish your shopping, right? It's these little things that will help, I think, and it's not just a blanket approach to I'm not doing that thing or I'm going to wear these headphones. You know what I mean? Funny you should mention the order supermarket we just assigned oldest on that task to assist in his dealing with tasks and public relations. He does the whole task from creating a list to pick up. That's good. Yeah, nice. And those can be really good. Like, you're helping someone to be more independent then, because if they think, oh, I hate supermarkets, I can't do shopping, I'm never going to go shopping, I get angry when I go shopping. If you say, well, there's this other option available for you, you could do click and collect instead. They can just become really good at click and collect. It's an option. That's a viable option. I don't see why people are so. And it's someone's. I prefer click and collect. I hate supermarkets. I get overstimulated really easily. My partner says whenever we go into a supermarket together, I go silent. And it's just because there's such an onslaught of like lighting and sound and colors and choices, and yeah, I'm not a fan. It was 3 days of going over the substitutions that may or may not be acceptable, but we did it and reached an accord. Right, so this is another thing, expecting change. This is something I think is absolutely diabolical in uh, how we treat people with learning disabilities. We try and cotton wool change. We try and wrap people in cotton wool and big changes in their life. We don't want it to happen, especially people with autism, and that's not helpful. Because then when something inevitably does change that's massive, they can't cope with it. Yeah? Helping people to understand unexpected things will happen. What are you going to do when that unexpected thing happens? Are you going to, uh, you know, use a sensory distraction? Like maybe you have like something that you like to fiddle with, or like something like you might like something soft on your face. Are you going to uh, talk to someone about it, about how you're feeling about that, and go through it rationally? Or are you going to um, do something that makes you feel good in that moment? Are you going to want someone to break it down for you step by step? When do you want to be told about that massive change? All of these things, especially dealing with smaller changes, like substitutions in a supermarket shop, being able to cope with that gives people the skills to be able to cope with greater things. And it's very important that we go through these steps with people. And it's not going to be something, as I said, people with learning disabilities and autism have very rigid thoughts. They expect something to be a certain way. They get, well, generally speaking, not everyone, they may get stressed out if it doesn't go the way that they thought it would. And that's why we need to tell people that these changes are going to happen inevitably, and how we're going to cope with that, what we're going to put in place. It's very important. I go shopping late at night to avoid people. Yeah, I can't really because my supermarket shuts quite late, quite early. So yeah, unfortunately. And now I have to go prepare my stream. I'll catch the rest on replay. Thank you for this helping to normalise this conversation. Mad respect, more of this, please. No problem, Claire. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, we got to normalise learning disabilities. We got to normalise autism as well. Like that's another one that has been. And what I'm talking about here is that um, autism is seen. I mean, this is a whole different stream, really. Autism's a different kettle of fish, but autism is seen at the moment. I don't want to say something controversial. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it, and I don't mean any disrespect to people who are autistic, who I may describe here, but there's an issue with the way autism is presented. currently on social media and television and stuff like that, and it's presented in a very one-dimensional way, which is high-functioning autism, um, which is where somebody has, you know, good verbal skills. They may lack social understanding. They may be a bit awkward, or not understand social rules entirely. Um, and they may be a bit rigid in their thinking, but largely they can act independently. Um, and they just have some minor social issues. I say minor; they can affect someone quite extremely. But what I mean by minor is that you know they tend to get things, but just not right away. You know, now autism is a spectrum condition, right? And autism can affect people quite extremely, and you get this kind of like extremely rigid, extremely like have no ability to understand social rules without a lot of input and stuff, and it can lead to learning disabilities as well because of that. You know, and that's where you get people who don't communicate verbally, who may be extremely oversensitive to stimulus or undersensitive to stimulus, and then they kind of try and balance that out. And it's not. We need a more broad representation of autism, other than what's kind of on these kind of like shows like the Undateables and uh, on social media where people talk about their own autism, because the people this is a big point actually about learning disabilities and autism. The people who are experiencing this aren't as able to communicate their experience in a social media platform, um, because they don't necessarily have the skills to be able to do that. So somebody who doesn't communicate verbally, who has who is autistic, isn't going to be telling you about their autistic experience on YouTube. They're not going to be talking about their autistic experience, um, or like going on a dating show. They may not have the capacity, like legally speaking, to be able to make those decisions, and that's really kind of why we have this one-dimensional view, is because it's a thin kind of demographic that are able to have those conversations about their experience, and that's what we see. And that gives a really kind of like narrow perspective of what these things are, and they're much broader than this. We need to be drawing attention to the breadth, not just in detail for one kind of slither of this group of people. And I think if we did that, we'd be able to understand. People will be able to understand autism much better, because it's not just these kind of experiences. It's more broad than that, and it can get much more disorderly to someone's life than what we see a lot. It's getting very dark in this room. My camera's holding up, but my eyes aren't. I'm just being lit by screen. Ooh. I used to mostly communicate electronically, email, conference, etc., and that's much more easier than using my voice. Yeah, that's the thing, right? So people, this is why it used to be non-verbal. People would be described as non-verbal, um, but that's not. It's not that people can't communicate. It's not that people can't talk. Even they may be able to talk, but they just don't. They don't connect with the words. They don't. Don't want to communicate verbally. Maybe it might be a choice, and so they find it easier to communicate in other ways. They may have pictures that they can point to that's how they communicate. They may have, as you say, they may be able to communicate really well electronically or typing, or they may communicate through their behavior, through you know um, interacting with their environment. There's this video, I don't know where to find it. I wish I did, but of this woman who's autistic who um, interacts with her environment. So she might turn the tap on and like play with the tap rhythmically, or she might like kind of brush something on her face, or she might scratch like wire or something to make a certain sound, and that's her stimulus is through that, and that's how she's communicating. If she's doing a certain behavior, then that's her communicating through that behavior, and she can communicate verbally perfectly in this video, she writes out this whole description of what she's doing and why she's doing it, and it's written entirely by her, and it's very extremely eloquent, like more eloquent than most people I know. But she just doesn't like communicating that way. She wants to communicate through her methods, and she's essentially asking the question, why do I have to use the method that you want me to communicate? And that's a good question, I think. You know, if she can get her message across through some other means to the people that are important to her, then that's all that matters, really. You know, and I think it's just, I think we have this, we still got this zeitgeist of superiority, intelligent superiority. That's still prevalent, really prevalent. Um, and I think it comes from, you know, the way society is set up. I think you have people who are deemed to be more intelligent on the top running things, and they're what set the tone for the standards of the rest of um, the nation, really. So if they're saying, you know, we value intelligence, or, you know, productivity, then that kind of filters out into the rest of society, and that, I think that's what needs to stop. Really, we need to stop thinking about that as a value judgment. And when we're debating with people, certainly, like, you know, assuming someone's intelligence because they don't agree with your point is totally ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense. And um, the one thing I've learned doing the job I do is that you learn something from everyone you meet. There's always something they can teach you. They'll know something you don't. Um, like there's this one guy I support who just is incredible in terms of he knows all the bus journeys in the country. Essentially, you can say, I need to get from this place to this place. What bus journeys do I need to take? And that's just because that's his interest. He's interested in that. That's where he finds it. That's a hobby of his. Um, that's great. um, and then, you know, there's another guy who is really into Magic the Gathering. Now, I like Magic the Gathering. He smashes me. This is a really complex game. It's his interest. It's what he's into, you know. And so we're just saying that they are less able to be productive, therefore they're worthless. But they know things. They know things I don't know. You know, they understand the world in a different way. It's different. It's not worse. Seems to me to be more personality that rules over intelligence. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. But I do think that there's this implication, not necessarily a fact, but implication that the people who are the ruling class are more intelligent than the rest of us, and that's the reason they're the ruling class. You know, and I think that that's false, certainly. But I think that it's implied by, you know, all of these people went to this university or this private school or whatever. Not that there's anything, I don't know. Talk about my views on private schools another time. Taps Blue Mana, yes. Yes. I'm looking to get a new commander deck, but I don't know. Okay. So is there any more questions? So if there's for the TLDR, I suppose, and just thinking about, yeah, yeah, you know who I was talking about, Nerdy, the Eton lot, yeah. Um. So TLDR, people with learning disabilities. Learning disability is a specific diagnosis of somebody with an IQ below 70, equal to or below 70, impairment in social functioning, and diagnosed before the age of 18. That's the thing. It can be caused through environmental, genetic, or other natural factors, either uh, before, during, or after birth. Um, there's a long history of abuse and um, oppression relating to people with learning disabilities that we're still not out of currently. And we should stop devaluing people based on their intelligence and productivity, and start valuing them for who they are as a person, and giving them the same opportunities as everyone else through uh, kind of bespoke approaches to that individual and what their kind of learning style is and what they like and don't like. And that's what I do for a job. That's what I try and do for a job. It's difficult in the societal context we're in, but we do good work, I think. So yeah, that's it really. Thank you for listening, everyone. I think I'm going to wrap up here, unless there's any other questions that come through in the next kind of 20 to 30 seconds. But it's been great, guys. Answers and Reason is a great channel. I obviously do my psych stream here, but they do amazing content. Talking about philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, loads of different philosophical kind of concepts. I recently did a stream with them on the kind of ethics of charity, which was quite interesting because it takes a different view of what charity is and how we should approach it. And they've got more great stuff coming out. They tend to stream on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. I don't know what the topic is this week. And then this stream is so yeah, subscribe if you want to. That would be really good because you're going to get good content. It's very well informed. And then this stream is fortnightly on Mondays at 7:30, depending on how much I have to do after work. I had to do a lot after work today because I had to set this up. So yeah, and I think the next stream will probably be continuing the Dark Triad. So we'll be talking about Machiavellianism. So that'll be in a fortnight, 7:30 p.m. So yeah, it's been great having you. If you enjoyed this stream, please do give it a like and subscribe and hit that bell icon if you want to have if you want to be notified when we're talking and when we're streaming. And Charlie Dave's been releasing some great videos answering questions from theists and responding to kind of theistic claims and stuff, which has been brilliant. They're really good, so give them a watch as well. And with that, I think Nerdy Rodent says good job. Thank you very much. With that said, thank you for joining me. I hope you have a great week, fortnight, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks' time. And yeah, be kind, everyone. Bye.